He's editor-in-chief of Breitbart News and a New York Times best-selling author. And on this podcast, he brings deep research, prescient analysis, and world-class guests. He's Alex Marlow, and this is the Alex Marlow Show.
Merry Christmas, everyone. Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, whatever it may be when you're listening to this show. Dr. Tom Williams is my guest today. He's our Rome Bureau Chief at Breitbart News. He's a theologian and just one of the most able communicators that I got on a staff filled with great communicators. We rag on the woke Pope, of course, during this episode. We talk about the future of Rome, where he lives under Giorgia Meloni, who is seeming like she wants to be a close ally of President Trump. We talk about Joe Biden as a bad Catholic, and we conclude with the most important topic we can discuss on this holiday. It is the miracle of Christmas itself, the fact that God came into the world in human flesh. Amazing stuff. And we get his perspective on it, someone who's dedicated his entire life to thinking through these issues. I guarantee you'll enjoy this one. Let's check it out. All right, joining me now is Dr. Tom Williams, our Rome Bureau Chief at Breitbart News, also an author. He's got The First Christmas, which you can get now from Amazon, also on Kindle as well. So you can get it now. You can get it in time for Christmas and enjoy yourself. Is one of the most knowledgeable people I know about all things Catholic Church, Christianity, history, all-around interesting guy, helps us cover Europe at Breitbart News. I think most of you are probably familiar with Dr. Tom's work. Dr. Tom, I always like to live vicariously through your life in Rome. How are things in Rome right now? How is this Roman Christmas shaping up?
Well, actually, the vibe here is really good right now, despite the fact that, as you know, we're living through a pretty tough pontificate. And a lot of Catholics find that difficult, but it doesn't seem to slow them down in appreciating what it means to be in Rome at Christmas. And this year that's coming up is a special Jubilee year. There's a lot of pilgrimages planned, and you can already see people showing up right now. Rome is packed. They've had all these different building projects. There's been construction all over the city, so it's been topsy-turvy. But they've been systematically finishing them one by one. The mayor promised that 80% of the construction sites would be done by tonight, the 24th. So anyway, Rome looks great right now. It's chock-a-block with people wanting to be here. And as I say, the vibe is super positive.
How is the Malone Administration going? Because from an outside observer, we like it, but what's it really like inside?
Well, the Italians love her. I mean, she's got huge approval ratings. She shows no sign, as you know. I mean, we've had a lot of failed leaders in this country. The turnover is very, very quick because all it takes is a little bit of lack of confidence. They can call for a vote midterm and oust somebody. This happens all the time. They haven't been able to find a chink in Maloney's armor. She's extremely popular. She won by a healthy margin when she ran, and now she's maintaining that. So no, she is as popular here as any leader that we've had in my time. I've been here over 30 years, and she's the favorite.
So it's something that, I always get my hopes up because you hope that the momentum that the populist, nationalist, conservative wing of really the entire West that we have right now, that'll translate because, I mean, we love going to Europe. We would love to see a strong Europe, but as it's got more liberal and more secular, it certainly hurt it in major ways. Do we feel like this could sustain itself? Do we feel like this is something that's potentially could the Trump's rising tide could lift all boats throughout the West?
That's certainly my hope, and I think it is definitely possible. I think Brussels too has kind of contributed. They overplayed their hand,
wave,
and trying to force their way into national decision making and national sovereignty issues. There's been a lot of pushback to that, and that's why the populist movement in Europe has maintained itself. And you see this in France, you see this in Austria, you see this a little bit in Spain, definitely in Italy, in Germany with the AfD. This is something where, people don't like to be told what to do. Even if they're not necessarily super conservative, they don't like the idea that there's this multinational kind of fuzzy organization of unelected people that are basically setting rules for their own countries.
Yeah. So when you look at this pontificate, it's very discouraging for Catholics, and it feels like this Pope is wrong on so many of the big issues. His latest one, he's accusing Israelis of cruelty in Gaza. It seems like he's legitimized some of the homosexuality and the trans stuff to some degree. What's the truth about this? But because the Vatican did have some LGBTQ plus event on the Jubilee calendar. I guess that's gone now. But the most shocking one was the baby Jesus with the Palestinian scarf. Which one of these do you want to tackle first, Dr. Tom? Because it's all disturbing to me, and we haven't caught up about it in a while.
No, it's true. And it is kind of a mixed bag. The Pope is primarily culpable, I have to say, for all of these things. The buck has to stop with the leader. There are backstories to these. For example, the Palestinian scarf question in the manger. He was a little bit hit from behind. In other words, they brought this, he had them in, and all of a sudden they threw the scarf down there and they started taking these pictures and things. But, that, again, the Pope's team should have gone through that, known exactly what was going to happen before it happened. So they got rid of that scarf basically the same day, but it was enough to go on all the major media sites. People took note of this. We had it out, I think, the first at Breitbart. We were very quick because it was a big story. But it's, again, even if the Pope is not giving specifically the nod to that, he allowed it to happen. It happened on his watch. Some of the other things are he's more directly involved. For example, as you mentioned, the Israeli situation in Gaza. He's really picked sides on this. He has taken sides, and every time he speaks out on it, he's always chiding the Israelis. He never really refers back to that initial powder keg that set this entire thing off. And not even the hostages have not even all been returned yet. So that's something he should be dwelling on, and not.
We say it very politely. You're a polite guy. I'm relatively polite. It feels it's such a big deal. What you just said. It's that this all started with a torturous terror attack that killed countless amounts of people, and there are still hostages missing. And we just blow straight through that to some grievances from the group that started the war, which I'm not saying there isn't a shred of truth to it, but it's just we just are so willing to overlook the origins of who started the fight here.
Well, I remember the day it happened, I said to my wife, they have just given Israel carte blanche to do whatever they want. They've been waiting for this opportunity. Obviously, they didn't want the carnage to happen. But, Hamas really gave that to Israel. They said, you can do anything you want now because we went in, we killed thousands of your people. We kidnapped, we have them as hostages. And we know Israel, we know the way they're going to react. You don't expect anything else. There was never any question in my mind, at least, how Israel would react. They're very clear about these things. And they have been systematically kind of living out what everyone who watches Israel at all knew was going to happen. So there shouldn't be any surprises here. But for the Pope to come forward, just recently and question whether maybe Israel is guilty of genocide, that was just absurd and also really, really offensive. As the sufferers, the victims of the best known and most important genocide in history, to call the Jews, perpetrators of a possible genocide without the facts in their favor. They're not trying to eliminate Palestinians. They are definitely trying to eliminate Hamas. But to say that this is a genocide is wrong on the face of it. And it was very irresponsible on the part of the Pope.
January 20th is the day, and Washington, D.C. is the place. That's when and where Donald Trump will be inaugurated as the 47th president of the United States. He gets a whole new inauguration. It was already 45th. Now it'll be 47. And we want to send you there. You can win a once-in-a-lifetime VIP experience to attend the inauguration in Washington, D.C. It includes airfare for you and a guest to Washington, a 3-night stay in our nation's capital, tickets for the presidential inauguration, and much more. Don't miss this historic opportunity to celebrate the greatness, the history, the excitement of a presidential inauguration. To enter, you see the link in the show notes for this episode, or go to SalemPodcastNetwork.com/Trump. Guys, I've said that this is the marquee event on anyone's social calendar for the year, really for the decade for most people. And you get a chance to go. I don't see why you wouldn't give it a shot. SalemPodcastNetwork/Trump. All you got to do, and you'll get your name on the list. And let's see if you can win. I hope you do. Okay, so the Pope is suggesting Israel is committing some sort of a genocide. I just wonder who's getting to the Pope. Where is he getting his information? Why does he feel like that's the truth that's happening right now? And that's the bigger concern. It's not the fact that the people that Israel's at war with are trying to wipe them off the map.
Well, the Pope talks to the people he talks to in the sense that, first of all, he's surrounded by a lot of yes men that tell him what they know he wants to hear. People have learned the hard way. You don't contradict him. You don't question his decision. You don't question his take on things. And so because of that, that's been a natural filtering so that he is surrounded by people who tell him what he wants to hear. He has said specifically in this case that he speaks every week with someone from Gaza, from a parish there, a local Catholic parish, and he gets the information from there. So obviously he's getting it from a Palestinian viewpoint. He doesn't talk to anybody, obviously, from the other side to tell him, what Israel's thinking and why they're doing what they're doing. And he sometimes is like that. He can be very singular in the sense that he can draw from one source and basically repeat whatever that source tells him without ever using critical thinking and expanding out and looking at, is this really the thing, the only thing that's happening?
I got to get one of those jobs where I can just not use critical thinking at all and just get away with everything, and the whole world pays attention whenever I say anything. I mean, I just keep going back to the Palestinian flag, that I just don't understand why he would politicize things like this. It strikes me as very odd. Do you feel like that he is getting worse as time goes on, Dr. Tom? Because we've spent a decade talking about his disappointments, which are myriad. Not to say that he doesn't have a good moment here or there, but it just seems overwhelming now every time there's a story about him being political at all. It's always, his instincts are just terrible.
Yeah, I think he is getting worse. And I think there's also a psychological issue there. I've spoken to people who are very close to him and who say, obviously without wanting their names mentioned, that they think he's bipolar, that there is stuff that is so weird with him where he'll say one thing one day, one thing the next day. He contradicts himself. He says things that are just off the wall, strange. He has these bouts of anger where he lashes out at people around him. I just don't think he's a very well man. And I think that this shows, and this, I mean, you mentioned before the issue of LGBT questions. And right. So he surrounds himself with openly pro-gay and pro-LGBT people. Just most recently naming the new preacher for the papal household, somebody who's kind of defended homosexuality in the Bible, saying, well, maybe even the apostles, maybe this, absurd things, right, that you wouldn't expect from any serious theologian. But you get that on the one hand, and then he has these, language which is very strong. He twice in a row with a group of bishops and priests in Rome talked about too much faggotry in seminaries and using a word in Italian that is crude. It's like that. That's why I say it in English, because it has that level of crudeness. And he knows full well what it means, and he uses it. So you just don't know. And he said that gays should not be in seminary, that there is no place for them in the priesthood. And yet he does all these other things. He now has allowed gay blessings, which is very confusing for people. They know gays can't get married in the Catholic Church, and yet they get this kind of blessing. And it's just a bizarre thing.
It is bizarre to me, and this is one of the points I make quite a bit, which is that the insistence that we're tolerant of gays and gay people, I was fully on board with that, Dr. Tom. I'm of a certain age. I grew up in West LA. That was never questioned, but it's the glorifying it. We have to have an event in the middle of Rome for not just gays, but the T's, the Q's, the I's, the pluses, whatever the pluses are. It wasn't enough to be tolerant? No, now we have to be celebratory of not gays, but of some sort of fringe stuff that's probably just mental illness. And that's unquestioned. To come back to the last point that we made about the Pope, is that why shouldn't we just stop and say, well, do we need to be doing this? Or can we just cut it off as it's important to love gay people in your life, but we don't have to make them priests? That sounded good to me. We couldn't have just stopped there?
Well, that's the way it was under JP2. That's the way it was under Pope Benedict. Yeah. I have never known gays to be mistreated in or by the Catholic Church. They're welcome everywhere. There's never been an issue. So for the Pope now to come along, Pope Francis to come along and say, we need greater inclusion, and we're like, what have we not been doing? We're not going to change the catechism and suddenly say that gay sex is cool and fine and God approves. We're not going to, but nor are we going to condemn them and say they're the only sinners on earth. We all are sinners. We've all got our, but that wasn't, as you say, wasn't that enough to be clear about the teaching? Yeah. And yet at the same time to be very loving toward the person.
Yes.
That's kind of.
Here's what's funny is that this is what I love about the Catholic Church is that they have a very high standard on paper, but there's no person in a football pads and headgear blocking me from receiving communion. If I was extra sinful that week and didn't make it a confession, like it's not, the standard is there and I know it's there, and you walk around knowing that you're failing in certain ways and you need to be in touch with that and you need to do penance for that. But ultimately there's the hall monitoring is kept at a relative minimum, but we treat ourselves as though we're mean and cold, which we're not. And I just don't understand this, that we need to be coached up to this level where we're now doing events for the I's and the A's, whatever those are. It's just, it strikes me as we've completely got unmoored from what matters the most.
I think you're exactly right. And as you know, and this has been very hurtful to us as Americans, the Pope has singled out the U.S. and U.S. conservatives in particular as kind of some sort of boogeyman, that we hate everybody and that we're mean and we don't want.
It's completely false.
It's false. I mean, I both of us know tons and tons of American Catholics and conservatives, and they're the nicest people on the planet. And they're good to everybody, and they just, they really try to live good lives themselves. They're not judgmental of other people. They have their standards. They believe what the church teaches, but they're not out there, finger wagging and telling people they're all going to hell. That just is not happening.
Okay, easy segue here, because the Pope had prayed for commutation of death row inmates, and he got it as of today when we're recording a day before this episode's coming out, for those of you who are catching it, ultra fresh. Joe Biden's commuted the sentences of all but 3 federal death row inmates. He picked the 3 most famous ones, and they do deserve to die, Dr. Tom. That's super, super consistent, that Biden has that standard. But the rest of them, including the one who murdered 12 people, including children, they get to live. I don't understand this. Is this what the Pope wanted? Are we Catholics were expected to think that the Boston Marathon bomber should die, but the guy who blows up a family with 12 people, like they should live? I don't get it. I'm very confused, and I think that's the point. But what did the Pope want, and what did Joe Biden deliver?
Well, this is what the Pope wanted, and this is what Joe Biden delivered. And I am virtually certain that Joe Biden did it specifically to please the Pope. Joe Biden is coming to Rome. He's going to meet with the Pope. He wants to go out on a high note. He wants to go out looking like I'm the Pope's guy. I'm this good Catholic. We know that's a total sham. I mean, he's a horrible Catholic in terms of what he actually does and talks about, the standards that he puts out there. But the Pope will be very happy with that, and he'll give him a warm thing, and I'm sure he's going to say something about it. I'm sure he's going to come out and praise that and say it was a great move. And as you say, the optics are terrible. I mean, I'm not a huge advocate of the death penalty, but also as a moral theologian, I am very well aware of all the arguments that have been given for centuries in favor of capital punishment. There's nothing unjust about it. There is nothing unjust about capital punishment. The Vatican City State only abolished the death penalty in 1969.
Okay, I want to talk about this because this is something that's unknown, I think, even to most Catholics. As we just assume, if you're Catholic, you're supposed to be against the death penalty. And the history is much more complicated than that. It was not part of doctrine, per se, until fairly recently. Can you give us that history, Dr. Tom?
Sure. This really started in a big way under Pope John Paul II. John Paul II, he never said it was wrong. He never contradicted the history and all the support of people like Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine and all these others who said death penalty is part of life. This is a real thing. But he said, in the state of affairs we have right now with our criminal justice system, we have ways of containing people. We don't necessarily need this. And maybe the message, if we don't use it, is more positive about our appreciation of the value and dignity of human life, even of grave sinners and criminals. So he basically floated out there as something, let's work in a direction where this becomes less and less necessary, where it's applied less often. But he didn't go any further than that. Benedict the 16th held it at that as well. Pope Francis comes along and says, no, this is actually inadmissible, and this is actually contrary to the values of the gospel. So he starts using this language. Thankfully, he's never said it's inherently, intrinsically evil. He has not said something that would actually contradict 2,000 years of history of moral theology and the reasoning of saints and scholars. What he has done, he's used this weird term, which is not even theologically precise, inadmissible. And inadmissible basically says we can't really have it right now. But I think he has a studied ambiguity about him where he puts these things out and just leaves everybody confused. And as you say, we know as Catholics, we're supposed to be moving away from this. But, even Pope Benedict XVI said, somebody challenged him on this and said, well, what about these cafeteria right-wing Catholics? They're cafeteria because they're pro-death penalty. And he said, look, there's a difference. He says, you cannot be a good Catholic and be pro-abortion. You cannot be a good Catholic and be pro-euthanasia because these are intrinsically wrong, the murdering of innocent people, the killing of innocent people. He said there can be a legitimate diversity of opinion on questions like the death penalty. He said, and not for that reason are you a bad Catholic, not for that reason should you not be receiving communion. And he was a great thinker and very nuanced in his thought, and that was the teaching he gave. It's something that I refer to back a lot because I find it very helpful.
Folks, pay attention because this is as serious as it gets. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are racing to lock in radical policies before Trump takes office in January. They're not just winding stuff down, they're cementing their control. Biden's already signed Executive Order 14067, and banks are actively testing a government-controlled digital dollar right now. You've heard me talk about this on the show. This isn't about modernizing currency, it's about total control. They want to track every dollar you earn, save, and spend, every single one. And here's the kicker. Once this system is fully implemented, it'll be nearly impossible for Trump to undo it. The radical left and their global elite allies will have a permanent grip on your financial life long after they're out of power. Trump's called this a dangerous threat to freedom, and J.D. Vance warns it could mean total government control over your finances. Folks, this is real and it's happening right now, but you're not powerless. That's why my friends at Priority Gold have created a free wealth preservation guide to help you fight back. It lays out 3 critical steps to shield your savings from this overreach. Text FREEDOM to 24999 right now to get your guide. That's FREEDOM to 24999 or visit PriorityGold.com. Don't wait. Text FREEDOM to 24999 today and shield what's yours. So it's so important to hear this because there are some myths in society that we have heard so many times, we just accept it. I can't tell you how many smart people tell me that the 2 political parties just switched because the Republicans are the racist ones now, and it was really the Democrats who were the racist before, but so that we Republicans need to own the racist Democrats of yesteryear because the parties just switched. And it's just like, oh yeah, because parties do that all the time. And it's repeated so often. I've heard, Stanford educated people tell me that, the party just switched. And it really just means that they read a lot of establishment media. They listen to a lot of MSNBC, and they want to claim that they have no history of racism and our side does have history of racism. And the more you think about it, you realize that this is idiotic. The Catholics, you must be against the death penalty. This is becoming one of those things for me, which is that I'm not saying that it's a black and white issue. I am saying, though, it's way more the nuance than, let's say, our take on late-term abortion, which is no nuance in it. And that's one of those things where I think it's really important for people to understand that a lot of people cop out on the death penalty and not grappling with the intense moral questions that it bring up because they rely, the Catholics are against it, so we're cool, right? Well, not exactly. It's way more complicated.
Yeah, it is. It is way more complicated. And, a lot of the reactions that I saw come out last week when the Pope said my prayer intentions are for the commuting of these sentences of death row criminals, so many people just said, even as a question of emphasis, as a question, again, of optics, you've got all these babies being killed in the womb. You've got serious crimes being committed around the world. You've got Christian persecution. You've got all these things that are seriously wrong. And you're going to single out this small little group of serious criminals that have done horrifically bad things, and that's going to be the hill that you're going to stand on? That's going to be a hill you're going to die on? I mean, what about all these other issues? What about a question of emphasis and focus? Why are you talking about? It's the same thing he's been doing these past years, as you and I have discussed. Why talk so much about immigration, so much about climate change, and so little about salvation, so little about other things that matter, or even other political issues that matter a lot more than these do? And he gets these things in his brain, and he is, by his leaning, he is a progressive. He just is. From his upbringing, his Latin American roots, everything about, he's got kind of knee-jerk reactions to things. And he does love being a progressive. He loves to be loved by the left, and he actually likes being criticized by the right. He said years ago, it's an honor for me to be criticized by the Americans, But what kind of serious poem, what kind of serious man of God says something like that? It's just childish. And
all right.
Yeah.
All right. Here's a question I've been dying to ask you for a long time. So people are hearing this on Christmas Eve, maybe Christmas Day. And at some point, Christmas Eve or early Christmas morning, I'm going to be getting all 4 of my children into an elephant-like vehicle made by American auto manufacturer. And I'm going to drive us down to Mass, and we're going to get there. And if I'm lucky, I'll get about 10 quiet minutes. That's the most. Maybe we'll get to 15 if they're just completely on fire. The Catholic Church has not helped me in this regard, Dr. Tom. There is, if I ever go to a friend's church at a more evangelical church, then they'll have a little area for the kids to hang out and learn about Noah's Ark or something while the adults go and hear the service. Catholic Church, not into this. Why not? Why don't they make it more accommodating to people with all these families? Because part of the reason I have so many kids is I'm a Catholic, Dr. Tom, and I don't know anywhere to put the kids during church.
I mean, I think there is a mixed bag. There are parishes that are actually more attuned to things like that. Unfortunately, they're the exception and not the rule. What you described is more the rule. And my own take on this has always been Catholics are complacent because they think, well, we've got the real sacraments. We've got apostolic succession. We've got the truth. And so all these other incidentals, our music, our preaching, how we take care of kids, our outreach to the parish, we don't need to focus on those things. Whereas, Pastor X down the street, the evangelical church, he is practicing his sermon all week. They've got the choir going because they really want to draw people in. They're on fire for this. And that's kind of what you've got. And I think that's
this is really interesting because
really
I've made a lot more jokes about Joel Osteen in my life than said nice things about him. But I'll tell you one thing that's for real, that he says that he does these 15 minutes a week, and it's the centerpiece of his week is giving the best sermon he can give. And that's obviously, he's got the prosperity gospel, he's got all the stuff that I'm not into, but it's isn't that a sign that, well, if it's really working well for this guy, like maybe we should try some of that? That'd be nice.
Well, I hate to say it, but in this case, you are totally preaching to the choir. I could not agree with you more. And it's frustrating, very frustrating for me too. And like you, I stay Catholic. I keep going to Mass. I keep taking the sacraments, and because I believe, I believe it to be true. I believe it to be the right package. It's frustrating. It's frustrating right now because the Pope we have. It's frustrating because of some of the pastoral stuff is terrible. But I hold on with hope, and I'm happy to be a Catholic because I believe. But it doesn't take away the frustration of all those things. We just fall down on a lot of issues.
And just to let any smarty pants in the audience who are hearing this conversation, look, I understand there's some inherent risk of giving the kids to Catholic babysitter at the church. I understand that. There's a very bad history there. I get it. But we got to come up with something, Dr. Tom, because the church was instrumental in encouraging me having a large family, church teachings, Catholic teachings, the Bible. I mean, that's why I have a large family in many parts. And now I don't know what to do with them during Mass, where I need Mass. For me, I need to be there, and I can't get that much out of it because I've got at least one of them needs attention during the entire service. And it's lost on, the ones who enjoy the music are not getting to listen to it because the ones who don't care are screaming. And so anyway, we're going to make this a project, I think, over the next few years, because I need help, because I can help the church. I can do this. I can be a consultant on this. I want to make my mark in the church in this regard. Okay, let's go back to semi-political, semi-church related, the Notre Dame Cathedral reopening. A huge event. I mean, just hard not to love every minute of it. But as someone who is someone who lives in Europe, witnessing it, someone who's a historian, theologian, what was your takeaways from that event?
I mean, I thought it was awesome. I thought it was awesome. I happened to be in Paris. I did not go to Paris for that event. It was announced after my wife and I were going there for our anniversary. Our anniversary is December 7th. So we happened to be in Paris for our anniversary right when they were doing this. So all these great political figures and leaders from around the world all descend on Paris. And talking about, I mentioned before, the vibe in Rome right now around Christmas is awesome. The vibe in Paris was out of sight. And it's a very secular city, generally speaking. It can be very cold. The people can be unfriendly. That was not the case over that weekend. People were genuinely excited, and they were excited over a spiritual event, because no matter how you look at it, it's a cultural symbol, but Notre Dame is a church. It's one of the most important Catholic churches in the world. And they threw themselves into this, the French did. And really, it's funny for such a secular state, even a sometimes hostile to religion state, they really pulled out all the stops. They did a great job structurally. The vestments, okay, we're not great on that. The altar leaves something to be desired, but basically they blew it away. They did a great job in the restoration. And I got to hand it also to the clergy and the Archbishop of Paris, who came out and said, Macron was pushing him, saying, we got to recover some of this money, despite the fact they'd gotten tons in donations, including from Americans. But he said, we got to charge admission, €5 admission now to go into Notre Dame. And he said, not on your life. This is a church. People are free to come and go. We are never going to charge admission.
Another amazing thing that we Catholics have going for us. I mean, I can't. I used to attend at, I was part of St. Matthew's Parish in DC for a short amount of time, which is the cathedral there. It's mind blowing, and it is like a museum almost. It is just so ornate and big, and it's got one of the biggest organs in the country, and it's a pleasure just to walk inside. And you kind of can't believe that you're just allowed to just wander in and just. You feel God's presence when you walk in. Then you hear some of the sermons, and then all of a sudden it's just, you maybe reconsider if you're in the right place. But it is very cool that we do that. I think it's a great draw. So I don't like the idea of just cheap shots. And so people stood up to Macron then. Is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you also, Trump, just getting our political angle, pulled a total coup, showing up there. And he was the star, honestly, in terms of the people who were there and wanting to hold up this religious event, because no matter what and wanting to be present for it, it was a great move on his part.
I love it.
And Maloney was there, and all the people that were just hanging out, and they were saying, this is us. We love Christianity. We love, these things, while the people on the left hate them. And so we're allowed to celebrate this and play it up. And they did. And more power to them.
It's just so interesting because I was thinking now back to the Al Smith dinner, which is associated with Catholics, and how Kamala Harris sent in that stupid message with the stupid SNL skit, and Trump showed up and was funny and interesting. And, Jim Gaffigan, who's the host, who's a Catholic, but also a left-wing guy, he was like shocked that Harris wasn't there. And now, but Biden's trying to make good by commuting sentences of mass murderers. So it's just an interesting way to process faith, that there's still this political divide, and I'm more tuned into the political element than the faith element, even though, of course, I'm a faithful person and I attend church and I believe in the sacraments. But it is noteworthy how we come to different interpretations of what matters. Do you feel, what is the trajectory that we're on, Dr. Tom? Because we've had a lot of discouraging conversations over the years. It does feel like the Bible and being a faithful person is more fashionable now by a small margin than it was a little bit in the West, but it may be too small of a margin. What is your take on spiritual life in the West in general right now?
That's an interesting question. I think there has been, and we overuse this word perhaps, but there has been a war on Christianity, a real one on the part of the left, where a real attempt to demonize Christians. Christians used to be, oh, you can trust him, he's a Christian, this is good, he's a Christian. And to change the meaning of that word and to make it into something bad and suspicious. If someone is Christian, then we should think twice. Maybe won't be a good judge because won't be impartial, or won't be this because probably racist, or probably, there's been a real concerted effort on the part of the left to undermine that love of our Christian heritage as Americans in particular, but throughout the West. And this is something that I have found very disheartening and very troubling. But as you say, there's been pushback at the same time, because people who know other people who live their lives say, that is not me, those are not my friends. That what you're describing, what you're talking about, is something that you've made up, is something that you're projecting, but it doesn't really exist. And I think the recent election and what we're seeing in Europe and seeing a lot of places around the world is finally pushback. People are fed up. And they're saying, we're not going to take that anymore. You can only turn the other cheek so many times. And finally, you have to stand up and say, this is real, this is good, and we're going to stand for it. And we're not going to allow you to keep belittling things that we know to be pillars of our civilization and things that have made the West the great thing that it is, made Christendom and made the United States and made Europe, these things. The greatness of it, in large part, comes from its Christian heritage, its Judeo-Christian heritage. And that's something that we have to be proud of and not ashamed of.
Well, very well said. I want to go, I want to conclude, and we've all the time you need to conclude on this topic, but this is the big one, the most fundamental thing. God came into the world on Christmas Day. That's what we're celebrating. That is, it gives you chills just to think about the concept of it. But Dr. Traum, you've dedicated your life to theology, the Christian faith, being Catholic. Talk to us just simply, what do you think about when you think about this concept that is the most timeless concept imaginable? But what is it? What does it mean to you?
I'm going to start, just go back 1 second, I'll be fast. A segue with the last point we were making of kind of right and left. For the left, politics is religion. Politics matters so much, and that's why they die when they start losing in politics. For people on the right, even though we know politics is important, we have another vision where we know that the best politics will not save you, the worst politics will not destroy you as a human being, as a person. We know that there's a transcendent reality that is more important and bigger than those political realities that we live every day and that we spend a lot of time discussing and dealing with. And that's something I think for us, it is the backbone of who we are as people of faith, to understand that God is real and God matters more than anything else. And eternity is real. And it gives a perspective on all the different things that happen in our lives that goes way beyond. It's not just when you reach your death. It's thinking about being made for eternity, being made to live with God forever. And the fact that God showed that love by becoming small like us and sharing that reality and wanting to walk the streets with us and die for us, it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. As you say, it gives you goosebumps because it's real. It's like a story that's almost too good to be true, and yet it is true. And so many people have given their lives for it. And as you say, this is what makes everything real and makes sense, because of this reality. And without it, everything falls apart. Everything loses any sense. There's no point in fighting for anything if this is not real, at least from my perspective.
It's so important. So what do you, for people who don't have any faith, do you think they grapple with that issue? Because for me, it does feel like some of them do and just still can't bring themselves to find faith somewhere. But this always strikes me as all of this is just so bleak if you don't accept this fundamental principle.
Pope Benedict years ago had this great statement where he said, just the way believers struggle with doubt, atheists and agnostics struggle with doubt. The doubt of what if it's true? What if it's real? The same way that Christians say, what if it's not true? He says, any person who's honest, if you're an atheist or you're not, you're going to think, but what if it is true? And I think that is the question where God can come in. They wrestle with that and they say, but it's, is it too much to be able to believe? Or they think they're going to, relinquish their rationality, whatever it might be, whatever prejudices have been instilled in them to think what they have to give up by believing in God. But I think that is something that every human being in some way has to either wrestle with or repress and put away and just say, I'm not going to look at it.
So you wrote a poem, The First Christmas, first published at Breitbart. It's a hardcover book now. You can also get it on Kindle. What compelled you to write it? And I must say, it's a beautiful poem. The most important thing is it rhymes. I think poems should rhyme. Sorry, I'm old school that way. They should rhyme. It's too abstract for me if it doesn't. Maybe I'm not smart enough to understand the non-rhyming poems, but it's important to me. What compelled you to write it, and give us a sense of what it is?
It was really straightforward what compelled me to write it. I was realizing how my favorite Christmas shows and Christmas poems, notably 'Twas the Night Before Christmas and A Visit from St. Nicholas, are beautiful and lovely, but they're not particularly religious or Christian.
Yes.
And this is Christmas. And I thought to myself, isn't it possible to write a poem similar to 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, with the rhyme, with the movement, with something that kids will like to listen to, and yet that actually tells the story of what happened rather than, it shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. Isn't there some way to unite those two? And that was the challenge I set for myself. And so I spent some days just trying to work it out and make something similar. I did kind of model it in terms of the rhythm, the cadence after that original poem, but wanting to fill it with the Christmas story the way it is. And I wanted to give it to Christian parents and grandparents, so it's something you could read to your kids and know that it's fun to listen to, but at the same time, it's the reality of what we're celebrating.
Yeah, it's such an interesting point because that was my tradition to read that poem in my house growing up as a kid. I have kids of a certain age, so a lot of Dr. Seuss going on. The Grinch is by far my favorite Dr. Seuss story. There's no close second, and the movies are fine, but the book is just a unbelievably profound and beautiful story. No Jesus though, no Jesus, and that does what I'm recommending it. It is in the back of my head. I'm thinking about that it kind of does miss the most important part of Christmas. It gets everything else right about Christmas, but it does miss the most important part. So we need that stuff. And it feels like that to make that a part of your tradition, maybe you'll give it a shot, and maybe I know some of you in the audience will. You'll check out Tom's poem and it'll become a mainstay for you. And we need that stuff. We need to be a part of the culture as well. Dr. Tom Williams, our Rome Bureau Chief at Breitbart News. Any parting words for the audience before I wish you Merry Christmas?
Really just God bless our hearers. I really mean that. It's a great time when we can actually own whatever faith tradition or lack of faith we come from. These are real things. And the fact that we're able to talk about them is for me a blessing. And I wish that blessing on all our hearers.
Same to you. Merry Christmas to you and your family. Dr. Tom, The First Christmas on Amazon. You can also hunt it down on Breitbart News. Thanks to our producer, Misty. All of you emailing me, aloha@alexmarlow.com, subscribing. Tell 10,000 friends and family members at Christmas dinner about the new show. Can't thank you enough. And we'll talk to you after Christmas.